The cold came first, a predator that slithered from the blackwood pines and coiled around our village. It wasn't the natural chill of autumn. It was a living thing, heavy with the scent of ozone and old blood. Every wolf in the Stone Creek pack felt it settle in their bones, silencing the children and turning the pack warriors' gazes to the forest's edge. For 5 years, I had lived with a secret that felt like a shard of ice in my heart. But this cold, this presence, was the frost that would finally shatter me. My son, Kael, pressed his small body against my side, his warmth the only thing keeping the terror from consuming me whole. He did not know the danger we were in, but he felt my fear, a sour tang in the air between us. The king was coming, and tonight he would see the truth I had bled to die for, burning in my child's eyes. Silence descended upon the square. It was an absolute crushing void, broken only by the frantic beat of my own heart against my ribs. The pack, once a snarling, vibrant entity, was now a collection of statues carved from fear. Even the alpha of Stone Creek, a brute named Fenris who delighted in my past humiliation, stood rigid, his head bowed. No one was immune to the aura that preceded King Thorian Dravain. They said his wolf was born of shadow and iron, that he had torn the throat from the old king with his bare teeth. They whispered that a curse ran through his veins, a darkness that made the moon itself shy away. I had heard the stories, of course. Every Omega heard the tales of the Alpha King, a man more myth than flesh, a force that held the scattered territories together through sheer, brutal will. But I had never seen him. In my exile, I was beneath his notice, a barren, wolfless Omega cast out for her uselessness. I smoothed a hand over Kale's hair, a shade of dark earth, just like mine. It was his only gift from me. The rest of him. The rest belonged to a ghost, a monster, the king's most hated enemy. I drew the worn wool of my cloak tighter around him, a futile attempt to hide him from the world, from the gaze that was now sweeping over us. He entered the square not with a thunderous announcement, but with the deadly quiet of a storm's eye. 2 guards flanked him, immense figures in dark leather and steel, but they were mere satellites to his son. King Thorian was larger than the stories claimed. His shoulders were broad enough to carry the weight of all the packs. His presence so immense it seemed to drink the very air from my lungs. A thick, dark beard framed a mouth set in a grim line, and a jagged scar, pale and puckered, cut from his left temple down across his cheek, disappearing into the dark bristle. It was a wound that should have taken his eye, but the eye it had missed burned with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. His gaze moved slowly, deliberately, over the assembled pack. It was a predator's assessment, weighing the strength and loyalty of his subjects. He passed over Fenris with a dismissive glance that made our alpha flinch. He lingered on the warriors, their chests puffed with a pathetic display of bravado that withered under his scrutiny. And then his eyes found me. It was inevitable. I was on the edge of the crowd, as always, relegated to the periphery, where the unwanted things were left to fade. But there was no fading from a gaze like his. It was not a look of lust or even curiosity. It was a look of accounting. He saw the worn thinness of my dress, the desperate way I clutched my son, the mark of the outcast that clung to me like a shroud. I saw a flicker of something in those dark, fathomable eyes, not pity, but something colder. Recognition of brokenness. I dropped my own gaze to the frozen dirt, my entire body trembling. Don't see him. Please, spirits of the forest, don't see him. I prayed to gods I no longer believed in, a frantic litany in my head. Kael, sensing the shift in my terror, shifted in my arms. He peeked out from the folds of my cloak, his small face a mask of childish curiosity. It was a fatal mistake. The king's focus, which had begun to move on, snapped back to me, to us. The air grew thick, heavy. I could feel the eyes of the entire pack turn toward me, their scorn and suspicion a palpable heat on my skin. The barren one, I heard someone mutter, the old insult a fresh whip crack against my soul, with her bastard whelp. Time seemed to slow, stretching into an agonizing eternity. King Thorian took a step, then another, The hard-packed earth crunched under his heavy boots, each footfall a drumbeat counting down the last seconds of my life. He stopped directly in front of me, so close I could smell the scent of pine, cold steel, and something else. Something wild and primal that spoke directly to the dormant, withered wolf within me. It was the scent of absolute power. He said nothing. He simply looked down at the boy in my arms. Kale, my brave, foolish son, did not cower. He stared right back up at the formidable king, his head tilted. And in the dim torchlight of the village square, his eyes, those terrifying, beautiful, damning eyes, seemed to ignite. They were not the soft brown of my own. They were the color of molten gold, shot through with flames of ancient power. The eyes of a bloodline thought to be extinguished. The eyes of the man who had torn a rift through the werewolf world. The eyes of King Thorian's sworn enemy. The alpha of the banished Crimson Pack. A sound ripped through the silence. It was not a word, but a low, guttural noise from deep within the king's chest. A sound of raw, disbelieving shock. His wolf, the beast of shadow and iron, was reacting. I felt it. A seismic shift in the air. A wave of untamed power that made my knees weak. The guards behind him tensed, their hands flying to the hilts of their swords. The pack gasped, a collective intake of breath. Fenris took a hesitant step forward. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice strained. "She is nothing, an outcast. The boy is a nameless stray she brought back from the wastes." "Silence," Thorian commanded. The word was not loud, but it cut through the air like a blade, and Fenris froze, his mouth snapping shut. The king's attention remained fixed on Kael. His scarred face was a mask of unreadable emotion, but I saw the tremor in his hand as he slowly, so slowly, lifted it. I flinched, pulling Kael tighter against me, shielding him with my body. This was it. He would strike us down. He would rip the truth from my son's throat, and then mine, my life for Kael's. It was the only vow I had ever made. But his hand did not strike. It hovered in the air, inches from Kael's face. His gaze flickered from the boy's golden eyes to my brown ones. And for the first time, he truly looked at me. He saw the defiance warring with my terror. He saw the mother wolf that lived in me, even if my shifter form was broken. He saw everything. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a low rumble, a broken thing that seemed torn from the very earth beneath our feet. It was meant only for me, a secret whispered in a square full of witnesses. "His eyes," he breathed, the words hanging like frost in the air. "By the spirits. It cannot be." My blood ran cold. He knew. The secret I had guarded with every fiber of my being was laid bare. I braced myself for the end, for the fire of his wrath, for the cold steel of his justice. My only regret was that I had not been able to get Kael further away, that my foolish hope of hiding in plain sight had led us to this. The pack expected an execution. They craved it, the final bloody removal of the stain I represented. I closed my eyes, offering a silent apology to my son, but the killing blow never came. Instead, the crushing weight of his aura softened, replaced by something far more complex and terrifying. It was a vortex of shock, rage, and a sliver of something that felt dangerously like awe. He lowered his hand, his gaze still locked with mine. The fate of worlds seemed to hang in that single silent exchange. He saw the enemy's blood in my son. He saw the impossible truth that I, a discarded Omega, had carried the heir to a throne of ashes. He should have ended us. For the good of the kingdom, for the sake of his own vengeance, he should have ripped us apart. Instead, he knelt. The king of all wolves knelt in the dirt before me and my child. A collective gasp swept through the pack. Fenris looked as if he might choke. Thorian's gaze was now level with mine, and the fire in his eyes was no longer just the cold fury of a king, but the burning intensity of a wolf who had just found the one thing in the world that could either save him or destroy him completely. He looked from my terrified face to my son's defiant one. A vow was forged in that moment, a chain that wrapped around my soul. His voice was low, raw, and etched with a terrible, undeniable certainty. "Your child carries the power to destroy us all," he whispered, the sound a promise and a curse, "which means only you can save us." The world balanced on the edge of a king's whisper. For a heartbeat, there was only the cold earth beneath my knees, the impossible sight of the Alpha King kneeling before me, and the weight of his prophecy settling over my soul. Then sound returned to the world, a rushing torrent of it. The collective shock of the Stone Creek pack fractured into 100 angry, fearful whispers. They eddied around us, words like traitor, witch, and abomination stinging the air. Fenris, our alpha, looked from the king to me, his face a mask of purple-tinged fury and utter humiliation. His authority had been shattered by a single gesture. Thorian Dravain rose to his full, formidable height. The moment of vulnerability, if it had ever truly been that, was gone, sealed away behind a wall of pure, unyielding command. He did not look at the pack he had silenced. He did not spare Fenris another glance. His entire world seemed to have contracted to the small, tense space occupied by me and my son. "We are leaving," he stated. It was not a request. It was a realignment of the stars. My body, frozen with shock, finally obeyed my mind's frantic signals. I scrambled backward, pulling Kale with me, my worn boots scraping against the frozen dirt. "No," I breathed, the word a puff of white in the frigid air. My terror of the king was immense, but my terror for my son was a universe unto itself. What did he want with him? To study him? To use him? To drain the strange power from his blood and discard the husk? Thorian's dark eyes, deep as a forest at midnight, fixed on mine. For the first time I felt the full, focused weight of his will. It was not the brutish dominance of an alpha like Fenris. It was older, heavier, a pressure that promised to crush mountains. Yet within it, there was a strange, terrifying clarity. "Look at them, Omega," he commanded, his voice a low growl that resonated in my bones. He still hadn't looked away from me, but I felt his meaning. I risked a glance at the faces of my pack. For 5 years, they had treated me with scorn and pity. They had thrown scraps my way, muttered insults as I passed, and watched with cold amusement as Fenris reminded me of my place as a barren, wolfless disgrace. Now that cold amusement was gone. In its place was raw hatred. They saw the king kneel to me, and in their minds, I had somehow stolen his power, his favor. I was no longer just an outcast. I was a threat. A sorceress who had ensnared the king himself. They would tear me apart the second he turned his back. His voice dropped lower, for my ears alone. "He is not safe here. You were never safe here. You have simply learned to live with the blade at your throat." His words struck a chord so deep within me it hurt. He saw it. He saw the truth of my existence, the constant grinding fear, the daily humiliations, the desperate fight to simply be invisible. He saw the strength it took to endure it, and in his own way he acknowledged it. It was more than anyone in my own pack had ever done. "What do you want from him?" I whispered, my voice trembling as I clutched Kael's small shoulder. My son, my brave Kael, was not crying. He was watching the king with those unnervingly ancient golden eyes, his expression one of solemn curiosity. "I want to keep a war from breaking this world in two," Thorian answered, his honesty as sharp and cold as a shard of ice. "And your son is now the heart of that war. I am taking you both under my protection. It is not a choice." He extended a large, calloused hand, not to me, to Kael. My son looked from the king's hand to my face, seeking permission. In that moment, the choice was mine. To trust the monster who knew my secret, or to be devoured by the pack of lesser monsters who had tormented me for years. It wasn't a choice at all. It was a surrender. With a shaky hand, I pushed Kael gently forward. My son, with no fear in his small body, placed his hand in the king's. Thorian's large fingers dwarfed Kael's, but his grip was surprisingly gentle. A current seemed to pass between them, a silent acknowledgement of the blood they both knew ran through the boy's veins. "Your Majesty!" Fenris finally found his voice. Stepping forward, his chest puffed out in a desperate attempt to reclaim his lost pride. "You cannot. She is a disgraced Omega of Stone Creek. Her spawn is an unknown. They are ours to judge." Thorian turned his head slowly, and the full force of his royal displeasure fell upon Fenris. The air crackled. The temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. A low, guttural growl rumbled in the king's chest, a sound that promised violence so swift and absolute it would be over before a scream could form. "She was," the king corrected, his voice lethally soft. "Now she is mine. The boy is mine. Question my claim again, and Stone Creek will have a new alpha by sunrise, one who understands obedience." Fenris paled, stumbling back as if struck. The threat was not idle. The entire pack knew it. The whispers died instantly, replaced by a cowed, hateful silence. He had claimed me. In front of everyone, not as a mate, not as a queen, but as a possession, a resource, a problem to be managed. Yet the word mine echoed in the hollow space where my own pack bond used to be, a strange and terrible warmth spreading through me. Without another word, Thorian turned and began to walk, Kyle's hand held firmly in his. His 2 guards fell in step behind him, their presence a silent, deadly promise to anyone who might think of interfering. They paused, waiting for me. I was a prisoner falling in line. I took one last look at the village that had been my home and my hell. No one met my gaze. They looked at the ground, at the sky, anywhere but at the Omega who had brought the king's shadow down upon them. I was already a ghost to them. I hurried to catch up, my worn cloak whipping around my legs. I walked beside Thorian, a small drab bird next to a great dark eagle. Kyle walked between us, a strange bridge between 2 worlds. We left the village square and the torchlight behind, plunging into the waiting darkness of the Blackwood. The journey was a blur of silence and fear. We moved with the unnatural speed and silence of wolves. Though we remained in human form, the king's guards flanked us, their senses alert, their presence a constant reminder of my new reality. I was no longer just an outcast. I was a royal captive. The forest, which had always been my only solace, now felt like the walls of a cage closing in. The scent of pine was thick and cloying, and the moon, a sliver of silver in the sky, seemed to watch me with a cold, judgmental eye. Thorian said nothing to me. He held Kyle's hand, his focus seemingly on the path ahead, yet I felt his awareness of me in every breath I took. I could feel him cataloging my scent, wood smoke, fear, and the faint, sweet smell of motherhood. I could feel his gaze on me when he thought I wasn't looking, a heavy, assessing weight. What was he seeing? A broken Omega? The mother of his enemy's child? Or the key to a puzzle he was only just beginning to understand? After what felt like an eternity, the oppressive darkness of the ancient forest began to thin. Ahead, a warm, golden light bled through the trees. We emerged into a vast clearing, and my breath caught in my throat. Before us stood a great lodge, a fortress built not of cold stone, but of massive, dark pine logs, each one the size of a full-grown man. It rose from the earth as if it had grown there, a monument of wood and will. Smoke curled from a wide stone chimney, and warm light spilled from windows, paned with polished horn. It was beautiful, powerful, and utterly intimidating. The doors were heavy oak, reinforced with bands of iron, and inlaid with intricate flowing patterns of pure, gleaming silver. A cage of pine and silver, safe, warm, and inescapable. The guards at the entrance bowed their heads as we approached, pulling the massive doors open. We stepped inside, and the warmth hit me like a physical blow. The main hall was immense, the ceiling held aloft by whole tree trunks, their bark still intact. A fire large enough to roast a whole elk roared in a stone hearth that took up an entire wall. Furs were strewn over polished wooden floors, and the air smelled of burning oak, beeswax, and the faint masculine scent of the king himself. Thorian released Kyle's hand. He gestured to his guards. Leave us." The two warriors bowed and retreated, pulling the great doors shut behind them with a deafening boom that echoed in the sudden silence. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only this hall, the crackling fire, and the immense shadowed presence of the king. He shrugged off his heavy, fur-lined cloak, tossing it over a chair. Underneath, he wore a simple tunic of dark wool, the hard muscles of his chest and arms clearly defined. The scar on his face seemed to pull at his skin in the firelight, a permanent reminder of a violence I couldn't begin to imagine. He looked less like a king now, and more like what he was at his core, a predator. Kyle, drawn by the warmth, had wandered over to the hearth, his small hands outstretched to the flames, his golden eyes reflecting the dancing light. He seemed utterly at home, as if some part of him recognized this place of power. My heart hammered against my ribs. The king's silence was more terrifying than any threat. He was watching me again, that fathomless gaze stripping away all my defenses. I stood twisting the frayed edges of my cloak, a worthless Baron Omega who had somehow stumbled into the heart of a royal war. Finally he spoke. His voice was different now, stripped of its public authority, leaving only a raw, weary gravel. "I know that bloodline," he said, his eyes flicking to Kyle, then back to me. "I spent a decade hunting it to the ends of the earth. I watched the last of them burn, and was told his line ended that night." I could not speak. My throat was a knot of terror. He took a step closer, and I flinched. He stopped, a flicker of something, frustration, regret, crossing his face. "I am not going to harm you, Marenya," he said, and the sound of my own name on his lips was a shock that jolted through me. No one had used it with such weight, such gravity in years. "And I will die before I let anyone harm that boy. You have my vow." He looked at Kyle, whose back was to us. But a vow is not enough to stop what is coming, the magic that burns in his eyes. It is a fire that will either cauterize a wound or burn the whole forest down. He turned his full attention back to me, his eyes boring into mine, demanding the truth I had sworn to take to my grave. "Now," he commanded, his voice dropping to a low, urgent whisper that held the fate of us all. "You will tell me everything, and you will not lie. His life depends on it." The silence in the great hall was a living thing. It was made of the crackle of burning oak, the soft sigh of Kyle breathing by the fire, and the immense waiting stillness of the king. His command hung in the air between us, heavy and absolute. Tell me everything. The truth was a serpent I had held coiled in my gut for 5 years. To let it out now, to him, felt like swallowing poison. But he was right. Kyle's life depended on it. I drew a ragged breath, the warm, smoky air doing little to calm the frantic beating of my heart. My gaze dropped to my hands, raw and chapped from years of hard living. I could not look at him as I spoke. The shame was too great. "After I was cast out," I began, my voice a raw, reedy thing I barely recognized. I wandered. Stone Creek made it clear I was not welcome in any of the border territories. They called me Baron, a curse. No pack would take in an Omega who could not bear pups, who had no wolf to offer in a hunt or a fight. I could feel his eyes on me, an intense physical pressure. He did not rush me. He simply waited, his patience more unnerving than any threat. I went north into the gray wastes. It's empty land. Cursed land, they say. Nothing grows there but scrub and bitter root. The game is thin, and the winter winds can strip the flesh from your bones. I thought I could disappear there. I thought I could just end. It seemed easier than returning to be stoned at the gates of another village. My mind slipped back, the warmth of the king's hall fading, replaced by the memory of a relentless, biting cold. The wind was a razor, slicing through the threadbare wool of my cloak. For 3 days, a blizzard had howled across the wastes, burying the world in a shroud of white. I had found shelter in a shallow cave, a mere overhang of rock that did little to blunt the storm's fury. My wolf was a cold, silent stone in my soul, offering no warmth, no strength. I was just a woman, alone and freezing to death. Hunger was a hollow ache that had long ago turned into a dull, listless apathy. I was dying. I knew it, and a part of me welcomed it. On the third night, the storm broke. The wind died to a whisper, and the moon, full and impossibly bright, painted the endless snowfields in shades of silver and blue. The cold intensified, settling deep into my bones. I was too weak to shiver anymore. I closed my eyes, ready to let the long sleep take me. And then I smelled him. It was a scent that cut through the sterile cold, impossibly alive. Pine and wood smoke, yes, but also blood, fresh and coppery, and something else, something wild and dark, like upturned earth after a storm, like ash and old magic. It was the scent of a predator, an alpha of immense power, and it was close. I tried to press myself further into the rock, to make myself smaller, invisible. My heart, which had been beating so sluggishly, began to pound with a fresh wave of terror. Rogues in the wastes were desperate, savage things. A shadow fell over the mouth of my small cave. He was huge, a silhouette against the blinding white of the snow, so large he blocked out the moon. He stood there for a long moment, just watching me. I could hear the soft crunch of snow as he took a step closer, into the meager shelter of the rock. The moonlight caught him then. His hair was the color of a raven's wing, long and wild, dusted with snow. His face was hard angles and sharp lines, a face carved by battle and loss. But it was his eyes that held me. They were the color of molten gold. Even in the dim light, they seemed to burn with their own inner fire. He was wounded. A deep gash on his arm bled sluggishly, staining the snow at his feet a stark, vivid crimson. He said nothing. He just looked at me, this frozen, half-dead thing huddled in the rocks. I expected the snarl of a rogue, the cruel laugh of a predator who had found easy prey. Instead, his gaze held a strange, assessing quality. There was a weariness in him, a loneliness that seemed to echo the vast, empty landscape around us. "You are a long way from any pack, little mouse," he finally said. His voice was a low, rough baritone, like rocks grinding together. I couldn't answer. My jaw was locked with cold. He knelt, his movements fluid and powerful despite his injury. He was so close now I could feel the heat radiating from his body, a furnace against the Arctic air. He reached out a hand and I flinched violently, a pathetic whimper escaping my lips. His hand stopped. He looked at my face, at the raw fear in my eyes, and something shifted in his expression. The hard edges softened for just an instant. "I am not going to hurt you," he said, his voice softer now. "But the cold will. You are dying." He was right, I was. And in that moment, faced with this powerful, wounded stranger, a strange sort of peace settled over me. If this was how it ended, so be it. He pulled a small leather pouch from his belt, uncorked it, and held it to my lips. The sharp, fiery scent of potent liquor burned my nostrils. "Drink," he commanded. I obeyed numbly, the liquid searing a path down my throat and pooling like a small sun in my stomach. Strength, raw and immediate, flowed into my limbs. He watched me, his golden eyes searching my face. "Who cast you out?" "Stone Creek," I managed to rasp, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. "I am barren." The word, my shame, hung in the frozen air between us. He didn't laugh, he didn't sneer. He just nodded slowly, as if this was a truth he understood. "The packs have grown weak," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "They discard what they do not understand. They fear what they cannot control." He tended to his own wound then, tearing a strip from his tunic and binding it tightly, his movements efficient and sure. He had been hunted. I knew it as certainly as I knew my own name. He was running, just as I had been. We were two different kinds of exiles, meeting at the edge of the world. He built a small fire with a skill that was mesmerizing, coaxing a flame from a few dry twigs he carried with him. The warmth was life itself, and I huddled toward it, my body shaking with violent, uncontrollable shivers as feeling returned. We shared the rest of his liquor and a piece of dried meat that tasted like heaven. We didn't speak much. There was nothing to say. He was a powerful alpha, a fugitive. I was a broken omega, a ghost, but in the silence, a strange thing happened. He looked at me, and I felt seen, not as a failure, not as a burden, but as a survivor, as another soul weathering the same storm. Later, as the fire burned down to glowing embers, the cold began to creep back in. I knew I wouldn't survive until morning. He knew it too. He moved closer, his body a solid wall of heat beside me. The scent of him was overwhelming, primal. It bypassed my broken wolf and spoke directly to the woman, the desperate, lonely creature I was. He touched my face, his thumb brushing over my frozen cheek. His touch was not rough. It was a question. His golden eyes held a fire that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with a raw, desperate need that mirrored my own. In that moment, we were not an alpha and an omega. We were just two people at the end of their hope, seeking a moment of warmth in an endless winter. I did not fight him. I leaned into his touch. It was not an act of love. It was an act of pure, primal survival. A final, desperate defiance against the cold, against the loneliness, against death itself. His name was Lorcan. He whispered it to me in the darkness, a secret I held as he claimed me. And for one night, I was not barren. I was not an outcast. I was alive. When I woke, the sun was a pale disk in the sky. The fire was dead, and he was gone. There was no trace of him but for a single dark feather, a raven's feather, lying on the snow where he had been. I was alone again, but something had changed. A tiny, defiant spark had been lit in the frozen core of my being. A secret, a life. My story finished. The words fell into the silence of the king's hall. I was trembling, wrapped in the phantom cold of the memory. I still hadn't looked at him. I couldn't bear to see the disgust, the condemnation. I had willingly lain with his greatest enemy. In his eyes, it was the deepest betrayal. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. I braced myself for the explosion of his rage, but it didn't come. Instead, I heard the scrape of his boot on the stone floor. He had moved closer, so close I could feel the heat from his body, just as I had felt Lorcan's. My breath hitched. "Look at me," Thorian commanded. His voice was a low, strained thing, tight with an emotion I couldn't name. Slowly I lifted my head. My eyes were blurry with unshed tears. The king's face was a rigid mask of control. His jaw was clenched so tight, a muscle jumped along his scar. His fists were balled at his sides. The fury was there, a dark storm churning in the depths of his eyes, but it wasn't aimed at me. It was a cold old rage, an ancient hatred directed at the ghost of the man from my story. Lorcan, he bit out the name as if it were a curse. Of the Crimson Pack, the Blood-Eyed, the Fire-Caller. He stared down at me, his gaze piercing. "Did he hurt you?" The question was so unexpected it stole my breath. Hurt me? Fenris had hurt me with his words and his scorn. The pack had hurt me, with their shunning and their pity. The cold had hurt me. Lorcan had saved my life. "No," I whispered, the answer honest and raw. "He saved me." Thorian's eyes closed for a brief second, as if my answer pained him. When he opened them again, the storm was still there, but it was joined by something else, a dark, grudging understanding. "He always did have a way of finding the cracks in the world," he murmured, his gaze shifting to Kael, who had fallen asleep by the fire, curled up on a soft fur rug. "He finds broken things and uses them to his own end." "He didn't use me," I said, a spark of defiance flaring in my chest. "I was going to die. It was a choice." "Was it?" Thorian countered, his voice dangerously soft as he took the final step that closed the distance between us. He loomed over me, his shadow swallowing me whole. He smelled of power, of iron and pine and winter. He left his heir in the belly of a cast-out Omega, hiding him in plain sight within my own territory. It was not a choice, Morenya. It was a move in a war you didn't even know you were a part of. He reached out, his hand moving not toward my face, but toward the side of my neck, where my cloak had fallen open. I froze, every muscle in my body screaming to flee, but I was rooted to the spot by the sheer intensity of his gaze. His fingers, calloused and warm, brushed against my skin, just below my ear. I gasped at the contact, a jolt like lightning striking my spine. My broken, dormant wolf, the thing that had been silent for years, stirred. It was a faint, terrified flutter, like the wings of a trapped bird, but it was there. It was reacting to him. His touch was feather-light, tracing a pattern I couldn't see. His brow furrowed in concentration, his dark eyes fixed on my skin. "He did not just leave you with a child," Thorian whispered, his voice a guttural rumble of dawning, horrified revelation. He pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned, but his eyes remained locked on my neck. "That bastard! He marked you. He bound you to his bloodline." His words were a brand against my skin. "He marked you." I recoiled as if struck, my own hand flying to my neck, my fingers searching for, what, a scar, a symbol? I felt nothing but my own frantic pulse hammering against my fingertips. My skin was smooth, unblemished. I had looked at my own reflection 1,000 times in still pools and polished bits of metal. There was nothing there. "There's no mark," I stammered, shaking my head, backing away from him. The warmth from the fire seemed to recede, leaving me cold and exposed. "There's nothing there. You're wrong." "Your eyes cannot see it," Thorian said, his voice a low, grim rumble. He didn't press closer, but his intensity held me captive. "No human eyes can. But a wolf can scent the echo of it. A faint trace of old magic, woven into your very being. It's why your pack's bonds never fully healed after they cast you out. It's why you survived the wastes. He didn't just give you a child, Omega. He anchored part of his life force to you." My mind reeled. An anchor, a bond, not the sacred, cherished bond between a true mated pair, but something else. A secret chain, a tether of power I never knew existed. Was that the spark I felt that night? The flicker of life that allowed me to walk out of the blizzard and back into a world that despised me? I had thought it was my own will to live, my desperate need to protect the new life inside me. But the king was telling me it was a cage. A leash. Why? The word was a broken whisper. Why would he do that? "Insurance," Thorian answered, the word hard and cold as iron. He began to pace before the hearth, his movements restless and predatory, like a caged wolf. Lorcan was the last of his line. If he died, his blood, his magic, the very soul of the Crimson Pack, would die with him. But by binding himself to you and siring a child, he created a loophole. As long as you lived, his essence had a refuge. As long as the child lived, his blood had a future. He stopped pacing and turned to face me, his scarred face grim in the flickering firelight. "He made you a living vessel for his legacy, Morenya, and he made your son a prince in exile. A walking, breathing claim to a throne I burned to the ground." The truth of it settled over me, a suffocating weight. I was not just the mother of his son. I was a relic, a walking phylactery for a dead alpha's power. And Kyle was not just a bastard child. He was a weapon, a political crisis, a spark that could reignite a genocidal war. My quiet life, my simple, desperate goal of keeping my son safe and fed, was a fool's dream. We had been pieces on a game board from the very beginning. My legs gave out. I sank onto the edge of a fur-strewn bench, my head in my hands. The great hall, with its warmth and solid pine walls, felt like the most fragile of shelters against the storm that was brewing inside me and out. Thorian watched me, his expression unreadable. The rage was still there, banked like embers deep in his eyes, but it was overlaid with a weary sort of gravity. He was the king. This impossible problem was now his to solve. "The other packs," I said, my voice muffled by my hands. "If they find out, if they see his eyes, they will call for the boy's head," Thorian finished, his tone devoid of emotion. It was a simple statement of fact. "They will see his father in him, and they will demand I finish what I started 10 years ago. They will see Lorcan's magic as a blight to be purged. The treaties that hold the territories together are built on the ashes of the Crimson Pack. The existence of an heir would shatter them." He fell silent for a long moment, his gaze on Kyle, who stirred in his sleep, his small face untroubled. A look of profound conflict crossed the king's features. It was the look of a wolf caught between instinct and duty, between vengeance and an unwanted, terrifying new responsibility. "For 5 years you kept him hidden," he said, his voice softer now, tinged with a grudging respect. "You survived in a pack that despised you, raised him alone, and told no one. You have a strength your own alpha was too blind to see." I looked up at him, my vision swimming. "I did it because he is my son. I would do anything for him." "I know," he said, and the simple affirmation resonated with a truth that went beyond our enmity, beyond the war between our bloodlines. He was an alpha, a king, a warrior, but he understood the primal, absolute loyalty of a parent. He walked over to a heavy, dark wood table and poured amber liquid from a crystal decanter into 2 glasses. He brought one to me. My hand trembled as I took it. The liquor was strong, smoky, and it burned a welcome path through the ice in my veins. He drank his own in a single, rough swallow, the glass thudding back onto the table. "There is more you need to understand," he said, his voice all business once more. "Lorcan's magic was not like ours. It was older, unpredictable. He could call fire, they said. He could walk through shadows. It's a power that is tied to emotion, to blood. We do not know how it will manifest in the boy, or when. We don't know if it will be a trickle or a flood." He gestured around the great hall. "This lodge is shielded. The walls are inlaid with silver. The foundation is set on iron-laced stone. It dampens wild magic. It will keep him contained for now. It will hide his scent from those who might be looking for it." My blood ran cold. Looking for it? Who? Lorcan had followers, true believers who escaped my purge. They call themselves the Ashen Disciples. For a decade they have been a ghost story, a rumor whispered by trappers in the deep woods. But if they learn that an heir exists, they will see him as a messiah. They will try to claim him, and they will kill anyone who stands in their way, hunted by the packs who feared him, hunted by the zealots who worshipped him. My son was trapped between the hammer and the anvil, and I was trapped with him. This beautiful, warm lodge was not a sanctuary. It was a fortress. It was a prison. "What will you do?" I asked. The question hanging between us, fragile and immense. The fate of my son rested in his hands. Thorian ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture of profound weariness that seemed at odds with his immense power. "For now, you will stay here. You and the boy will not leave the lodge. My personal guard, the Huskarls, will be your protectors and your jailers. You will be given food, clothes, anything you need, but you will not be seen. You will not be spoken of. To the world, Marenya Solven and her bastard child vanished from Stone Creek in the night. He was erasing us, hiding us from the world until he could decide what to do. It was a reprieve, not a solution." "And then?" I pressed, needing to know the endgame. "You can't keep him locked away forever. He's a child. He needs to run, to see the sun." Thorian's gaze hardened. "What would you have me do, Omega? Announce him to the Council of Alphas? Greetings, I have found the son of the man who slaughtered your fathers and brothers. Let us welcome him with open arms. He would be dead within a day, and our world would be at war by nightfall." I flinched at the brutal truth in his words. He was right. There were no easy answers. He seemed to see the despair on my face, and a fraction of the hardness in his expression softened. "There may be a way," he said slowly, as if the words tasted strange in his mouth. "There are whispers of a place. A sanctuary deep in the heart of the mountains, where the old magic is still understood, where it can be taught, controlled, the sunken valley. Most think it's a myth, but if it's real, it may be the only place he can learn to master what he is without it destroying him, or us. Hope, a dangerous and fragile thing, fluttered in my chest, a place where Kyle could be safe, a place where he could be himself. But getting him there, Thorian continued, his voice grim. The journey would be treacherous. We would be hunted by both my enemies and my allies, and I would need to trust the one person who has every reason to betray me. He paused, his dark eyes locking onto mine, pinning me in place. I would need to trust you, Marenya, the woman who carries my enemy's mark and his child. The challenge was laid bare. He was offering a sliver of a chance, a perilous path out of this beautiful cage, but the price was my absolute fealty. I, who had never had a choice, was now faced with the most important one of my life. Before I could answer, a commotion erupted outside. The sound of heavy footsteps on the wooden porch. A sharp, urgent voice calling the king's name. One of the huskarls, a grim-faced giant with a braided beard, burst through the doors without knocking, his eyes wide with alarm. "Your Majesty," he panted, bowing his head hastily. "A patrol from the northern ridge. They found something." Thorian was instantly transformed. The weary strategist vanished, replaced by the Alpha King, a creature of pure, coiled authority. "What is it, Gunner?" The guard hesitated, his gaze flicking nervously toward me and the sleeping form of my son. "It's a scent marker, my king. On our border, a single dark feather painted with ash. It is the sign of the disciples." Thorian went utterly still. The air in the hall grew thick, charged with a sudden, lethal energy. They were already here. They had sensed him. The scent of the coming storm was no longer on the horizon. It was at our door. The king's head snapped toward me, and in his eyes I saw it all. The impossible odds, the closing trap, the terrible choice he was being forced to make. The time for hiding was over. The game had just been forced onto the field. "Get the boy," he snarled at me, his voice a low, urgent command that tolerated no argument. "We leave at once, tonight." His eyes burned with a fire that was part fury, part desperation. "The hunt has begun." Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. One moment, we were prisoners in a gilded cage. The next, we were fugitives with the king himself. My limbs felt heavy, my mind a whirlwind of fear. The Ashen disciples, Lorcan's followers, they were here. They had scented Kyle's power, a beacon in the dark that had drawn them like moths to a forbidden flame. Thorian was already moving, his weariness burned away by a surge of pure, adrenalized command. He strode across the great hall, barking orders at Gunner, who had produced a rolled map from his tunic. Their words were a clipped, coded language of war and terrain. The high passes watched. "Take the river path through the Whisperwood. They will expect us to run west, toward the coast. We go east into the teeth of the mountains." My paralysis broke. I scrambled to Kel's side, my heart aching as I looked at his sleeping face. He was so small, so innocent of the war that was raging around his very existence. I gently shook his shoulder. "Kyle," I whispered, my voice tight with urgency. "Wake up, my love. We have to go." He stirred, his golden eyes fluttering open, still hazy with sleep. He looked from my terrified face to the king, who now stood fully armored in dark, hardened leather, a long sword strapped to his back, and a heavy fur-lined cloak clasped at his throat. Kyle didn't cry or complain. He simply sat up, his gaze preternaturally solemn, as if some deep part of him understood the sudden shift in the world. "Marenya," Thorian's voice cut through my fear, anchoring me. He strode over to us, his presence so immense it felt like a shield. He knelt, not in supplication this time, but as a warrior addressing his charge. He looked directly at Kyle. "Listen to me, boy," he said, his tone low and serious, man to man, despite Kyle's age. "We are going on a journey, It will be hard, and it will be dangerous. There will be times when you must be silent, and times when you must be brave. But I will not let them have you. Do you understand?" Kael, my little boy who had never known a father, looked into the eyes of this terrifying king, this ancient enemy of his bloodline, and nodded. A fierce, painful love swelled in my chest. He was Lorcan's son and more than just his eyes. Gunnar returned with a heavy pack, which Thorian slung over his shoulder with ease. Another Huskarl brought a small cloak for Kael, thick and warm, and a smaller satchel for me containing dried meat, a water skin, and a small sharp knife. The practicality of it was jarring. We were preparing for a desperate flight, not a royal journey. "The main force of the disciples will be drawn to the lodge," Thorian explained, his voice a low growl. "They'll think we are fortifying. Gunnar will stay with 10 of our best. They will make them bleed for every inch of ground and give us the head start we need." He looked at me, his dark eyes intense, searching. "I can take you both faster if I shift, but the boy? His scent would be a beacon on the wind. We travel as humans, and we move now." We left through a small secondary door at the back of the lodge, slipping out into a night that felt colder and darker than before. The moon was hidden behind a thick bank of clouds, and the air was heavy with the coming scent of snow. 2 more Huskarls, silent as shadows, materialized from the trees to join us. They were Thorian's elite, his most trusted warriors, and they now formed a protective diamond around me and my son, with the king at its head. The forest floor was a treacherous carpet of roots and stones, but Thorian moved through it with an unnatural certainty, never stumbling, never making a sound. I struggled to keep up, half carrying a sleepy Kael, my breath coming in ragged, panicked bursts. One of the guards, a woman with a stark, scarred face and pale, watchful eyes, noticed my struggle. Without a word, she moved to my side, gently took Kael from my arms, and settled him on her own hip as if he weighed nothing. Kael, who was usually so shy with strangers, leaned his head against her shoulder and closed his eyes. I shot her a grateful look. She gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod in return. Her name was Astrid. I learned that later. For now, she was just another part of the living wall that stood between my son and the horrors of the world. We moved in silence for what felt like hours. A relentless, punishing pace that pushed my body to its limits. My muscles screamed, my lungs burned, and the fear was a constant, bitter taste in my mouth. We were prey, and the hunters were closing in. Every snap of a twig, every hoot of an owl, sent a fresh jolt of terror through me. Sometime before dawn, Thorian called a halt. We took shelter in a dense thicket of ancient pines, their low-hanging branches providing a thick, dark canopy. The air was razor sharp. There would be snow by morning. We ate the dried meat in silence, the sound of our chewing loud in the stillness. Kael was awake now, quiet and observant, his golden eyes taking in the grim faces of the warriors around him. Thorian stood watch at the edge of the thicket, a motionless silhouette against the deep gray of the pre-dawn light, his senses stretched out into the surrounding woods. I could feel the tension radiating from him, a low thrum of contained power and absolute focus. "They are moving faster than I thought," he said, his voice a low murmur that carried to us all. "They have trackers among them. Wolves who can read a broken branch from a mile away." He turned, his gaze finding me in the gloom. "And they will be following your scent, Omega. That bond Lorcan placed on you. It's a trail of breadcrumbs leading them straight to his son." Shame and guilt washed over me. I was a liability, a danger to my own child. The very thing that had saved my life was now endangering his. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to ward off a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "Is there a way to break it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Thorian was silent for a long moment. "All magic can be broken," he said finally, his tone grim, "but the cost is high." He did not elaborate, and I did not dare to ask. We set off again as the first weak light of dawn filtered through the canopy, painting the world in shades of ash and bone. The terrain grew steeper, the path a mere suggestion of a trail snaking up the side of a mountain. The air thinned, and my legs felt like lead. It was late in the afternoon when it happened. We were crossing a narrow, windswept ridge. On one side, the mountain fell away into a sheer, rocky cliff. On the other, a steep slope of scree and stunted pines. I was behind Thorian, with Kael holding my hand, his small face pinched with cold and fatigue. Astrid and the other guard, a stoic man named Rolf, brought up the rear. The attack came with no warning, no sound. One moment the path was empty. The next, 3 figures melted out of the rocks ahead of us. They were clad in dark, ragged furs, their faces obscured by shadows and twisted leather masks. But I could feel the fanaticism rolling off them in waves, a scent of obsession and scorched earth. Ashen disciples. Simultaneously, 2 more appeared on the path behind us, cutting off our retreat. We were trapped. Thorian didn't hesitate. With a roar that was pure primal alpha, he drew his sword. The sound of steel singing from its scabbard was terrifyingly loud in the mountain silence. "Astrid! Rolf! To me!" he bellowed. "Marenya! Get the boy to the rocks!" He pointed with his blade to a cluster of boulders a few feet off the trail. I grabbed Kael's hand and scrambled toward them, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break. I pushed Kael behind the largest rock and stood in front of him, armed with nothing but my pathetic little knife and a mother's desperation. The fight was a blur of brutal, terrifying speed. The disciples moved with a frenzied, unnatural grace. They were not just warriors. They were zealots, fueled by a mad devotion. One launched himself at Thorian, brandishing a wicked-looking axe. The king met him head-on, his long sword a blur of silver. There was a clash of steel, a guttural cry, and the first disciple fell, a dark stain spreading across his chest. But there were too many of them. While Thorian engaged the one, another 2 swarmed him. Astrid and Rolf met the attackers from the rear, their own blades flashing, the air filled with the sounds of battle, the clang of metal, the grunts of exertion, the wet, sickening sound of steel finding flesh. I watched in horror as one of the disciples, a wiry, fast-moving man, darted past Thorian's guard and came straight for me. For Kael, his eyes, visible through the slits in his leather mask, were wild, fever-bright. "The blood lives!" he shrieked, his voice cracked and unhinged. "The fire will rise again." I shoved Kael deeper behind the rock and raised my small knife, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold it. It was a useless gesture, a child's toy against his long, curved dagger. He laughed, a dry, rasping sound, and lunged. I closed my eyes, bracing for the tearing pain. It never came. A dark shape slammed into the disciple from the side. A blur of fur and fury, it was Thorian. He had disengaged from the others, leaving his back vulnerable to intercept the threat to us. He didn't use his sword. He used his body, his hands, his teeth. A vicious snarl ripped from his throat as he grabbed the disciple's arm, twisting it with a sickening crack of bone. The man screamed, a high, thin sound that was cut short as Thorian's hand closed around his throat, lifting him from the ground. For a terrifying instant, I saw the king's wolf looking out through his eyes. They were no longer just dark. They were black pits of pure, unrestrained violence. The predator within him was unleashed. But that single, selfless act had cost him. As he dealt with my attacker, another disciple drove a short blade into his side, just below the ribs. Thorian roared in pain and rage, hurling the man in his grasp against the rock face with enough force to crush his skull. He spun, his sword a silver arc of death, and cut down the man who had stabbed him. The fight was over as quickly as it had begun. The 5 attackers lay dead or dying on the narrow ridge, but the victory was costly. Rolf had a deep gash on his arm, and Thorian was bleeding. He stood panting, his hand pressed to his side, blood dark and shockingly red, welling up between his fingers. "Your Majesty!" Astrid cried, rushing to his side. He waved her off, his eyes locked on me and Kyle. "Are you hurt?" he ground out, his voice tight with pain. I shook my head, unable to speak. I stared at the blood on his tunic, the dark stains spreading with every breath he took. He had been injured protecting me, protecting his enemy's son. The thought was a physical blow. Suddenly, a strange warmth spread through my chest, a tingling sensation that started in my core and rushed through my veins. It was not my own. It was a foreign heat, a phantom energy. I looked down at Kyle. He was standing beside me now, his small fists clenched, his body rigid, and his golden eyes were blazing with a light that was not a reflection of the sun. It was coming from within him. The air around him seemed to shimmer, and the scent of ozone, the smell of raw, untamed magic, filled the air. "The fire," he whispered, his small voice filled with a strange, resonant power. He held out his hand toward the wounded king. "It hurts him. Make it stop." Thorian stared at the boy, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock, pain, and something that looked terrifyingly like awe. The magic was awakening, here, now, in the worst possible way. "Kale, no," I cried, grabbing his shoulder. But the power, his father's power, was already uncoiling. It was wild, instinctive, a child's desperate wish to heal a protector. But it was a fire without a hearth, a river without banks. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that if he unleashed it, he wouldn't just heal the king. He would announce his presence to every disciple, every alpha, every creature for 100 miles who could sense the echo of Lorcan's blood. He would become a bonfire on top of the mountain. The world narrowed to the space between my son and the king. The wind on the ridge died to a whisper, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. Kyle's small hand, outstretched toward Thorian, was surrounded by a faint, shimmering corona of golden light. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of a coming storm, the crackle of raw, untamed power. It was the scent I remembered from the gray wastes, the scent of Lorcan, but purer, wilder, filtered through the untutored soul of a child. "Kale, stop," I pleaded, my voice tight with terror. I tried to pull him back, but it was like trying to move a rooted tree. His small body was thrumming with an energy that was far beyond my strength to contain. Thorian took a step back, his hand still pressed to his bleeding side, his face a mask of pain and disbelief. His guards, Astrid and Rolf, had their swords half drawn, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe as they stared at my son. They were warriors, accustomed to the raw physical power of the wolf. This was something else entirely. This was the old magic, the stuff of legends and nightmares. "The power, it's answering my pain," Thorian grunted, his voice strained. He looked from Kyle's blazing eyes to mine, and in his gaze, I saw a terrible dawning understanding. The bond. It's not just Lorcan's. It's a blood bond. My wound is calling to his son. His enemy's child was trying to heal him. The irony was so bitter it was almost a physical taste. Kyle wasn't acting out of loyalty to the king. He was reacting to the pain of someone he now saw as his protector, and his father's untamed magic was lashing out in response. A wildfire of compassion that would burn us all. I dropped to my knees in front of my son, forcing my way into his line of sight, breaking his focus on Thorian. I gripped his small shoulders, my own fear a cold, hard knot in my stomach. "Kyle, look at me," I commanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Listen to Mama's voice. You have to pull it back. Please, my love, you have to hide it. It's not safe." He looked at me, but his eyes were distant, unfocused. The golden light was intensifying, the air around him growing hotter. He was losing control. The power was a wild horse, and he was a child holding the reins. "I can't," he whispered, tears welling in his eyes, tracking clean paths through the grime on his cheeks. "It wants to get out." It was then that Thorian made his choice. In that moment, he was not a king weighing political consequences. He was not a warrior assessing a threat. He was an alpha, faced with an uncontained power that threatened his entire world. He could have struck Kale down. It would have been the logical, ruthless thing to do, to extinguish the flame before it became an inferno. Rolf and Astrid were tensed, waiting for that very command. Instead, he sheathed his sword. The sound of the steel sliding home was a definitive, deliberate statement. He ignored his wound, ignored the dead disciples at his feet, and took a deliberate, painful step toward us. He knelt, hissing in pain as the movement pulled at his injury, until he was on our level. He was face to face with the child, who was a living embodiment of his deepest hatred. "Marenya Kulza," he said, his voice a low, commanding rumble that cut through the magical hum. He did not look at me. His entire focus was on my son. "You carry his mark. You are the anchor. You are the only one who can calm the storm inside him. Talk to him. Remind him of who he is. Not his father's son. Yours." His words struck me with the force of a physical blow. You are the anchor. Lorcan had bound me to him, and through that bond, I was bound to this magic. Thorian was right. I was the key. My fear was useless. My panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. I took a deep, shuddering breath and pulled my son into my arms, holding him tight against my chest. I buried my face in his soft hair, inhaling his scent. Of wood smoke, of childhood, and underneath it all, that terrifying crackle of ozone. "Shh, my sweet boy," I murmured, my voice a low, crooning hum. I began to rock him gently, the way I did when he was a baby, when he'd wake from a bad dream. "It's okay," I whispered into his ear. "Mama's here. I've got you. You are Kyle. You are my son. You are the warmth of the sun on my face and the beat of my own heart. You are not a fire. You are not a storm. You are my love, my Kyle. Hold on to my voice. Come back to me." I poured all of my love, all of my fear, all of my desperate, fierce protectiveness into the words, into my touch. I wrapped my own will around him, a fragile shield against the raging power within. It was the most difficult thing I had ever done. It felt like trying to gentle a hurricane. I could feel the magic pushing against me, a wild, sentient thing that wanted to be free. Slowly, miraculously, it began to work. The golden light in Kyle's eyes began to flicker and recede. The oppressive heat in the air lessened. The hum of power faded. He sagged against me, his small body trembling with exhaustion, and the last of the magic dissolved into nothing, like mist in the morning sun. A deep, shuddering sob broke from his chest, and he clung to me, just a little boy again, terrified of what he had almost done. Silence returned to the ridge. There was only the sound of the wind, the ragged gasps of my own breathing, and the low, pained grunt from the king. I looked up. Thorian was watching us, his face pale and beaded with sweat, not just from his wound, but from the sheer force of will it had taken him not to react as a predator. The raw violence was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, unsettling combination of weariness and something I had never seen there before: respect. He had witnessed the bond between me and my son, had seen the strength I possessed, not of magic or of the wolf, but of a mother's love, and he had not dismissed it. He had counted on it. Astrid was suddenly at his side, tearing a strip of cloth from her own tunic. "My king, you are bleeding freely. We must bind this." He allowed her to tend to the wound, his gaze never leaving us. The gash was deep, ugly, and still weeping blood. It would need more than a field dressing. It needed a healer's touch. "We can't stay here," Rolf said, his gaze scanning the surrounding peaks. "That display. It may as well have been a signal fire." "He is right," Thorian said, his voice tight with pain as Astrid tightened the makeshift bandage. "We are out of time. The sunken valley is still a week's hard journey. We will never make it before they are on us again, or before the Alphas get wind of this." Despair, cold and familiar, began to creep back in. We had survived this battle, but we were losing the war. We were wounded, exposed, and hunted. Thorian pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. He looked down at Kyle, who who was now peeking out from my arms, his face tear-streaked and pale. The king's expression was grim, resolute, the look of a man who had run out of options and was now forced to walk a path he had sworn he never would. "There is one place," he said, his voice low and heavy with meaning, "a place they will not dare to follow, a place steeped in my own blood and power. It is closer, but it is not safe for him." He was not talking about a fortress or a stronghold. His tone was different. It held a note of reverence, of dread. "What place?" I asked, my voice trembling. He looked at me, and for the first time I felt like I was seeing the man beneath the crown, the wolf beneath the skin. I saw the curse he carried, the darkness the packs whispered about. It was real, and he was about to lead my son directly into its heart. "The Fading Lands," he said, the name itself seeming to suck the warmth from the air. "The heart of my family's ancestral territory. It is a place where the veil between worlds is thin, where the spirits of the old wolves walk. My blood protects me there, but his—" He looked at Kael, at his golden eyes. "His blood is anathema there. The very air will feel like poison to him. The spirits will see him as a blight, an intruder." "Then why?" I cried, clutching Kael tighter. "Why would you take him there?" Thorian's gaze was like granite. "Because it is the one place in this world where my power is absolute. It is the seat of my curse and my strength. There I can shield him from the world outside. And there I can face what is rising inside of him. The two wolves, his and mine, will meet. It is the only way to forge a truce, or it will be the battle that consumes us all." He held out his hand, not to Kael this time, but to me. It was not a command. It was not a claim. It was an offer, an alliance. The king of the Ironwood Pack offering his hand to the Omega, who carried the blood of the Crimson Pack. It was an impossible choice. To follow him into the heart of his cursed lands, to trust my son's life to the one man who had every reason to want him dead, was madness, but to refuse was to be consumed by the hunters behind us, or by the wild magic within my own child. His wound was still bleeding through the bandage, a stark red flower blooming on the dark cloth. He had earned that wound for me, for Kael. He had made a vow, not in words, but in fire and blood on this lonely mountain ridge. My decision was made. With a trembling hand, I placed my own in his. His grip was strong, his palm calloused and warm. A current passed between us, a silent, binding agreement. A vow forged in desperation and sealed in the shadow of a coming war. He would protect my son with his life, and I would walk into the heart of his darkness and trust him to lead us back into the light. 5 years. 5 years since that desperate flight up the mountain. 5 years since we had walked into the heart of Thorian's darkness. The Fading Lands. The name was still whispered with dread in the territories beyond the peaks, a cursed place of shadow and sorrowful spirits. But here, in the deep, secluded valley that had become our world, it was simply home. The air here was different. It was cool and clean, smelling of ancient stone, damp earth, and a faint sweet scent like blooming moon petal flowers that only grew in the twilight of the valley. The oppressive spiritual weight I had felt upon our arrival, the sense of being watched by 1,000 grieving ghosts, had receded. It had not vanished, but had settled. It was now a quiet, humming presence, like the memory of a song instead of a constant, mournful dirge. I walked a path worn smooth by my own feet, my worn leather boots making no sound on the mossy earth. The trees were colossal sentinels, their bark the color of iron, their leaves a deep shimmering silver. There was no harsh sunlight here. The valley was lit by a perpetual, soft twilight, the sky a canopy of deep indigo and violet, even at midday. It was a land of shadows, but the shadows were no longer hostile. They were peaceful. I found him by the Mirror Lake, a body of water so still and dark it perfectly reflected the twilight sky above. Kael was 10 years old now, lean and tall for his age, with my dark hair, but a strength in his posture that was all his own. He was not skipping stones or playing. He was sitting cross-legged on a flat gray rock at the water's edge, his eyes closed, his hands resting on his knees. He was perfectly still. Across the lake, a flicker of movement. One of the spirit wolves, a great semi-translucent beast with eyes of cold starlight, had emerged from the silver woods. It was one of Thorian's ancestors, a guardian of this place. In the first year, they had recoiled from Kael's presence, their silent howls filled with ancient hatred for his bloodline. But now, the great wolf simply stood and watched him, its spectral form radiating not aggression, but a quiet, grudging respect. I leaned against the trunk of an ironwood tree, content to watch my son. I was no longer the frightened, haunted woman who had stumbled into this valley. The shame of being a barren omega had been burned away, replaced by the quiet certainty of my own unique purpose. I was still wolfless, still unable to shift. But I had learned that strength was not always measured in tooth and claw. Sometimes it was measured in the stillness of the heart, in the ability to stand between two opposing fires and not be consumed. Kael opened his eyes. The molten gold had not faded with age. It had deepened. The untamed wildfire, now a controlled, steady burn. They were the eyes of his father, but they held the wisdom and discipline he was learning from another. He saw me and smiled, a pure, bright thing that lit up the entire valley. "Hello, Mama." His voice was clear and steady, with none of the childish fear that had once haunted it. "Hello, my love," I answered, my heart swelling. "Are the ancestors quiet today?" He nodded. "Grandfather Varian says a storm is passing over the eastern peaks, but it will not touch us here." He spoke of the spirits of Thorian's line, as if they were grumpy but familiar uncles. In the beginning, their whispers had been a torment to him. Now he listened to them, learned from them, and soothed their ancient sorrows with the innate warmth of his own spirit. A heavy, familiar footstep sounded on the path behind me. I didn't need to turn. I knew the scent of pine and iron, the immense, comforting weight of his presence. Thorian came to stand beside me, his gaze fixed on our son. He was still the king, his scarred face a mask of authority to the outside world. But here, with us, the lines of strain around his eyes would soften. The immense burden he carried seemed to lighten, just for a moment. "He grows stronger every day," Thorian murmured, his voice a low rumble. He reached out, not to touch me, but his hand hovered near my arm, a gesture of shared intimacy that was more profound than any public display. The balance he creates. It is a miracle I never thought to witness. The fading lands had been a prison for his bloodline's curse, a place where the shadows of their violent past were trapped. But Kael's magic, the fire of Lorcan's blood, had not clashed with it as Thorian had feared. Anchored by my steady, human heart, Kael's power had acted like dawn in a land of endless night. It had not banished the shadows, but had given them definition, peace. It had healed the land. It had healed the king. "He is a good boy," I said simply. It was the highest praise and the most important truth. Thorian finally looked at me, his dark eyes holding a universe of unspoken things. The debt between us, the alliance forged in desperation, had long ago transformed into something deeper. A bond not of magic, like the one Lorcan had forced upon me, but one of choice, of shared sacrifice, of profound respect. The faint warmth on my neck where Lorcan's mark had been was just that now. A memory, an echo of a ghost. The true bond, the one that mattered, was the invisible tether that connected the three of us. "The alphas of the council send their tribute," he said, changing the subject, as he often did when the emotions between us grew too strong to ignore. "They no longer send warriors to the border to watch us. They send scholars and grain. They fear us still, but they are beginning to understand. They call him the Dawn Prince." The Dawn Prince. It was a better name than the enemy's son. A fragile peace had settled over the territories, a peace born from a terrifying new reality. The kingdom was ruled by a king of shadow who harbored a prince of fire. It was a balance of power so absolute, so dangerous, that none dared to upset it. The Ashen disciples had faded back into myth, their zealotry broken against the unassailable walls of this valley and the iron will of the king who ruled it. Kyle got to his feet and ran to us. He hugged my waist first, then turned and looked up at the king. Thorian placed a large calloused hand on Kyle's head, a gesture of benediction and fierce paternal love. There was no more hatred for Lorcan's blood in his eyes. He saw only the boy, the future. We stood there for a long time, the three of us watching the spirit wolf fade back into the silver trees. A family forged in the crucible of war and secrets, bound by an impossible love. I was no queen, I had no title, but I was the anchor, I was the bridge. I was the quiet center of their world. I was Marenya Solvin, the outcast, the Baron Omega who had returned with a secret. And in saving my son, I had saved the king. In saving the king, I had healed a kingdom. And here, standing between the shadow and the flame, between my king and my son, I was finally, completely home.